Hello YouTube. We're picking up where we left off. We got a lot of pieces and we need to do some cleaning. But the first thing I want to do is remove this broken bolt. And this bolt is one of the two bolts that hold the rear shackle in. It was rusted through, so it broke off above the frame. So I'm going to try to apply some heat and see if we can pull this off with a pair of vice grips. I have been soaking it with penetrating oil, so we may get a little fire, but I think heat is the answer. Now we'll let it cool. I'll heat it again, and then we'll try to pull it out. All right, we'll heat it again. I'm heating around the bolt, trying to break it loose from the bolt. If I get the bolt too hot and I put some torque on it, it's going to just twist right off. Okay, let's try that. Okay, it's moving. There we go. We were successful. Ta-da! There's a sleeve here that's giving me some problems here. Let's put some heat on it. There we go. Little heat does wonders. Well, don't get this jammed in there. I'm finding that if we clean a little bit of the frame at a time, like a foot there, and rub it with 3M and keep it wet. This is nothing more than paint thinner. I'm trying to get all the grease off. Now, I'm finding that this frame is in pretty good shape. There's some areas that has some surface rust and some areas that are bare, but overall, I mean, it's in pretty good shape. Now, the problem I have is that my instinct is to paint the frame, but we want to make this a survivor, and survivor will allow you to clean, but yeah, there's strict rules on how much you can repaint. 80% of the vehicle has to be original. So if I paint this frame, I'm still going to be all right because the whole body is painted in original paint. But on the other hand, this frame is in such good shape, and this thing is a survivor. Maybe I should just leave it. My instinct right now is to leave it. Only touch up what I have to touch up and leave the original paint original. It's only original once. This is the front of the frame. These large holes are stock, but these notches are not. So I want to get rid of these notches. But the first thing we should do is just clean up the edges a little bit and do the same thing for the notch. My idea is to find a hole saw that'll cut out a slug the same size as this on a piece of metal this thick, and then what we'll do is we'll put it in there and weld it up and metal finish it so that you can never tell that it was there. No Bondo, just metal. I found this hole saw. I think it'll make a cutout the size that we want. So let's try it. Come on, off of there. There we go. Let's go see how we did. This piece is not perfect. We have a little flange here we gotta grind off. But if we put it in a hole, that's a pretty good fit. Now what I gotta do is just grind off this little bit here, and then this will be ready to be welded in. Our plugs fit reasonably well. This one in particular fits nicely. I have a magnet underneath the piece of metal here to hold it in place. All we have to do is trim the edge off. On this one, this hole is not quite as wide, so we're going to have to slim down the slug just a little bit, and then we'll worry about trimming it off. So let me trim it down a little bit and get it to fit in a little bit tighter. So we have nice tight gaps on that one, and nice tight gaps on that one. Now what we want to do is cut off the excess metal around those two washers so that they fit a little bit better, so we don't have as much grinding to do when we weld them in. So I found a circle that fits into the hole that was originally there. So if we set this piece in, we can mark what needs to come off. And the same thing over here. We don't want to touch the line, but we want to grind off everything up to the line. Let's let that paint dry. This is our piece here, and what we want to do is grind to the line. We don't want to grind beyond the line. We'll do the finished grinding once it's in place. But let's take some of this metal off. That looks like it fits pretty nicely, and we can put a little weld in there. So let's do the other one. Let's get rid of some of this paint. I'm happy with the fitment. I think it's time to take the leap, and let's tack it in. This is the first pass, and it doesn't look like much. Let's do a little grinding and see what we actually have. A little touch up there, and then a little file, and that should look really nice. We'll add a little more weld here. We'll turn the gas on. So here's our circle. And what we got to do is file like right there and right there. I'd say we have this one pretty much to size. We'll just sand this down and paint it. Now we got to do this one. We'll weld up the backside here and grind it down, and no one will ever know that there was a notch in the frame. We'll take some 180 sandpaper and smooth this out a little bit. We'll get the back side. And we'll let that dry and come back and put another coat on it. I'm going to take one side of the frame at a time and give it a final wipe down. And any spots that I come to that is bare or rusted, for example, this spot right here, I'm going to grind very gently, primer and paint. It's killing me not to paint the whole frame, but that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to patch it in and leave all the original paint. Wiping it down one last time, one side at a time, looking for any grease. We'll sand it down with 80 grit. Clean it up with some thinner. This is the place where the shock tower bolts up. And we'll put a little primer on it. Here we go. I'm just going to touch up over the top of the primer. I'm not painting the frame. I'm going to treat the front and the back as separate projects because it's bolted to the rotisserie and I can't get at it. So I'm going to have to support it somehow and then do the front and the back. I know it's killing me, but that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to leave the rest alone. This semi-gloss black is a pretty good match. I painted this right here and I painted this right here, and it's hard to tell. Last thing I want to do before I take the frame off the rotisserie so that I can finish the ends of the frame is to chase all the threads in the frame so that it goes back together nicely. I'm going to treat the front and rear cross members differently from the way I treated the frame. I'm actually going to strip these down, primer and paint them because they're visible. And I'm still not violating the 80% rule. So here we go. I have the inside, top and bottom, outside and inside of the rear cross member stripped of paint, but look what we found. So we can't leave it like this. And we got a dent right there. And the sides of the frame are like right there. So the ends of the frame are going to be welded to the bumper. So we don't want to get into that. So we're going to try cutting a little bit out here. We need to at least cut that far down and that far up. I don't want to go beyond the weld there, so I'm going to cut right here. I can always take more out. And the same thing on this side. I'm going to cut it right here. And then I can take more out if I can. Let's see if I can peel this off. There's the patch we need. We just got to do it in metal. I found a piece of metal the same thickness as the bumper. And we'll take the patch we need and put it right in the corner. We'll utilize the edges. We may have to file this one just a little bit, but I'd rather have too much than not enough. And now we need to cut it out. Now you can cut that out any way you want. You can cut it out with saber saw, hacksaw, cut-off wheel, you know, a whole bunch of ways. I have a bandsaw, so I'm going to use the bandsaw. So here we go. We'll clean up the edges a little bit so that our fitment isn't hung up by a burr on the edge. The patch is a little too wide and a little too tall. So let's do a little grinding and see if we can get it to fit better. There's a dent here at the bottom too that I didn't notice. That's going to be a pain. There's nothing left. The frame is right there. I can't cut any more out. So it's just going to be there. And our patch is a little too wide, a little too tall, but that's good. We can grind it down to shape. This disc is pretty dull, but I'm going to try to use it one more time before I change it. I have a nice gap all the way around. So, and by a nice gap, I mean it's not tight. It's just got enough gap so that when I weld it, there'll be good penetration. So let's put a tack on this and see where we're at. That's pretty flush. This is a little recessed here. You can see the dent. Unfortunately, that's there, but it's in back of the bumperette. I'm probably just going to leave it alone. There we have our patch welded in. All right, what we're going to try to do is just grind the weld. We don't want to grind the metal, just the weld. I think you'd be hard pressed to tell that there was a patch there. There was a trailer hitch here. And I'm going to put one back, to tell you the truth. It's the same style. But they must have nicked the bumper when they put the trailer hitch in. So I'm going to fill this with weld and grind it. But I'm not going to hold you to watch it. Here goes our first coat of 2 coats of primer. Here's our second coat of primer. Okay, now we got to wait 30 minutes to put a top coat on top of that. This is the first coat of top coat. This is the last coat. Okay, that's looking pretty good. This is a portion of all the nuts and bolts that we took off the Jeep. And what I want to do is clean them up. And I want to clean them up by tumbling them. We put them in the bin here and tumble them. But we can't do one at a time. We'd be here forever. So we got to take all of these bolts and nuts and put them in the bin together. And the only way I'm going to be able to sort them back out is if I take good pictures of everything. And that's why I've laid it out this way. So what I'm going to do is take an overall picture, and then I'm going to take individual pictures. So here's the overall picture. And now detailed individual pictures. So what I want to do is back up the pictures I just took. And here's my camera. And here's the DCIM and the camera and all the pictures. Now what I do is, rather than trying to figure out what pictures I've taken new, is I just copy them all, and the ones that are duplicate, it'll tell me that they're duplicate. So here we go, we're gonna copy, and we're gonna put them in pictures under 82 Jeep CJ7, and we'll paste them. And it'll come back up and say, holy smokes, you got a bunch of duplicates, like that. So I'm going to say, do that for all of them. I want to skip any duplicates. And we're done. So now I can go in here and look at any picture. And I can see the sleeves and the bolts and the brackets, and they're clearly labeled. Now we're going to mix all these bolts up. We're going to give it a bath and thinner, everything in a bath and thinner. Trying to get the oil off. This is all the thinner I have, my outer thinner. We'll make one more attempt to clean this stuff. We'll use brake clean. What we have here is the tumbler, and we're going to dump all these bolts in there. We're going to dump some water and some burnishing fluid. Put the top on, and now we got to turn it on. These are the bolts that we put in the tumbler 3 days ago. And now what we got to do is rinse it out, dry them off, and sort out the bolts. So here we go with the rinsing. This is just rusty water, that's all this is. Now what we got to do is get as much water out of here as we can. And I have a plug in here. Out comes the plug. We'll drain the last bit of water out. The reason I don't do this when I'm rinsing is it takes forever. Do you remember what the bolts looked like before we tumbled? I think that's pretty good. I think that's good. Look, the bracket for the transfer case. That came out really nice. I think we got it about the right time. There's a U-bolt clamp. Here's the bracket for the emergency brake. Now that the media is dry, we can separate the bolts and nuts from the media. If you try to do it when it's wet, the media sticks to the nuts and bolts and it's a pain in the neck. So all we're going to do is gather up every one that we find, and then we'll carefully go through the media to make sure that we've got all the bolts. Fortunately, most of these bolts are good size. We don't have to look for real small bolts. Now that I've pulled as many nuts and bolts out of this pile as I can, we're going to have to sift through this carefully to make sure there's not any more nuts and bolts in there. I guarantee you that I'll find some. And the way I do it is I just spread it out like that, and then move it to the other side. And that way I'll see any nuts and bolts that are still in this media. After sorting the bolts out from the media, this is what we have left. Now I'm not ready to try to match them up with the bags yet. We still have another process to go through. What we're doing here is taking all the nuts and bolts and putting them in racks so that we can put a little bit of powder on the heads of the bolts. And what we do is just screw it into these, I don't know what you call it, sheets that we made, so that just the head is exposed, and we'll just powder coat the heads, and that'll preserve the bolts so they don't rust. I have all the nuts and washers hung on a rack. I have all the bolts hung in plates, and we're ready to put some powder on. Here we go. We've got all the hardware from the first batch of tumbled bolts in the oven. We'll heat it for 400 degrees for 10 minutes. That's 10 minutes after the bolts reach temperature, and probably 20 minutes elapsed time, and then we'll have clear coated bolts. Okay, all done. Let's take a look and see what we got. We won't touch it yet because it's awful hot. Looks nice. What's different about powder and paint is that once powder is cool, you can do anything you want with it, whereas paint, you gotta wait 48 hours. So let's hasten the cooling so we can get these things back in the envelopes. Now we have to remove all the bolts from our fixture. Can you imagine what would happen if we were doing this with fresh paint? That's why I like powder so much. I mean, it takes a while to do it, but the end result is such that I wouldn't trade it. We have one last process to go through before we can attempt to put these bolts back in their bags. And what this is it's not a nut, it's a rethreader. And I don't know what the difference is between a rethreader and a tap and die, but the rethreader doesn't seem to be as aggressive, and what it does is clean out the threads. And we're going to run every bolt that we have here through the rethreader. Some of them I'll have to put in a vise, and then the bolts should be ready to go back in their packet if we can find it. We're dumping this batch of bolts out for the last time. We've probably got 5 more batches to go, and we're going to start matching the parts up with the bags. For example, I happen to know that that is the emergency cable adjuster linkage, so it goes right there. We'll do a little organization to make this a little easier. We'll put like bolts together, like fine threads, long ones. What I've done is grouped like bolts together. For example, all these washers are the same. All these washers are the same, but they're not the same as these washers. And obviously these are all the same. So now I can start to attempt to fill the bags. For example, we'll fill the bags with what we know. Now these are universal clamps, and these are universal clamp bolts. So we'll fill those bags first. Well, it took an hour and a half, but I got all the bolts separated back out to the bags that they belonged in by comparing bolts to pictures. And now we can put it back on the board. We have our board reassembled again with all the bolts and nuts and clamps in the bags. I ended up with a couple washers and a bolt that I don't know where they go. They may have been left over in the media from the last time I did this, but I've put them here just in case I need it when I reassemble. So this is the board. And this is what it looks like when the paint is dry. Now we just have to do the front. We have the front cross member stripped and ready for paint. With the frame all cleaned up and all the holes that have threads in them rethreaded, and the front and the rear cross members repainted, I think the frame is ready to be a good foundation for our Jeep. I think that we have completed our task here in that we've got a frame ready to be a foundation for the Jeep. If you enjoyed this video, there'll be more.